All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on episode 181 of Blowback, Exposing Imperial Decline. I have my regular co-host, Ian Kummer, streaming live from a suburb in Moscow. And he is a blogger and what else besides a blogger, Ian? You're a blogger.
Bloggers Guilds. Our
What?
Moscow correspondent. How's that?
Well, okay, we'll call Moscow correspondent, but you can check his work out at thereadingjunkie.com, and he also has a Substack. Our special guests, we have two special guests this morning. First special guest is Eddie Liger. He is an executive board member for the American Communist Party, and Jae Carico is a chapter executive for the Tennessee chapter of the American Communist Party. And today's episode is entitled ACP, the Best Hope for America's Future. And of course, ACP is the American Communist Party. So we want to talk about exactly why it is that the American Communist Party is the best hope for America's future. We want to talk about the platform. And I want to talk to Eddie and Jae kind of about their political development and what has led them to, I guess in Eddie's case, really forming a party, and for Jae, joining the party. Eddie, can I throw it to you and just get your take on, how you came to the awareness and understanding that you did that made you think that, hey, it's important that we get a party, that represents the people?
Yeah, for sure. So when I graduated college, it was 2020 during COVID, and my buddy Carlos Garrido and I started Midwestern Marx, which is basically a Marxist think tank media outlet that puts out Marxist-Leninist education and theory and things like that. And we were able to garner a pretty large audience doing that. And there was another group online called the Infrared Collective that was doing a similar thing, different strategy than us for sure, but similar goals of teaching people about Marxism, Leninism, and getting people organized. And we always said that Midwestern Marx would never become a party because we didn't want to take up that mantle ourselves, without any other sort of groups jumping on board. However, about 4 years after we started Midwestern Marx, we had this very large audience of Marxist-Leninists. And then you had Infrared, who had a large audience of Marxist-Leninists. And then you had this organization called PCUSA that also had a lot of dedicated Marxist-Leninists who were disillusioned with the party. And also you had a lot of people who supported Midwestern Marx and Infrared who were in the CPUSA. So after 4 years of trying to work within the CPUSA and realizing that it was an undemocratic organization that now functions as an appendage of the Democrats, we really had no choice but to split and reconstitute the party. And that's what we see ourselves as. We actually see ourselves as the inheritors of the legacy of the old CPUSA, the William Z. Foster CPUSA, before it was liberalized and co-opted by feds and became an arm of the Democrats and the American ruling class. So actually what we tried to do at the 32nd convention of CPUSA was push through a resolution to no longer support Democrats and to be an actual communist Marxist-Leninist party. But the leadership of the CPUSA, who makes good salaries and hangs out in an office building in New York all day, ended up squashing the Democratic vote at the 32nd National Convention and saying, no, we as leadership decided that we're going to continue tailing the Democrats. So at that point, we realized that working through the actual CPUSA was a dead end because it had been co-opted by feds. And we split and formed our own party. A bunch of CPUSA clubs and members came with us. And we've grown hundreds of members since then as well.
How did you were you born a Marxist-Leninist, or how did you deal with the nonstop cradle to grave indoctrination, and how did you think your way out of that?
Yeah, I was not born a Marxist-Leninist. I was born a George Bush pro-life Republican. That was my family. They voted for Bush twice because he was pro-life while slaughtering people in Iraq. So As I got older, I started to wake up a little bit, but the event that really triggered a sort of political awakening was in Wisconsin during the Act 10 resolution, where this Koch brothers controlled governor named Scott Walker tried to bust up the teachers unions and cut their salaries. And, he said it was to fix the debt, but of course the debt exploded under him. Actually, he cut the teachers' salaries, busted their unions, and the debt continued to skyrocket as he handed out corporate subsidies to corporations like Foxconn. So not only me, but my parents at that point were like, okay, well, maybe we're not Republicans because the Republican Party just royally screwed us over. And, my parents were always kind of those people who would be like, oh, politics doesn't really affect me, so I'm not going to pay attention to it until politics came to their doorstep. They could no longer ignore it because my dad was having his income cut by some corrupt vulture of a politician. So that really woke me up to what was going on in the political system. I started to get interested in politics. Bernie Sanders was running, a few years later in 2016, kind of introduced me to socialism. And then I really started reading Marxist theory when I was working for Bernie, actually 4 years later during the 2020 campaign. Also the 2020 campaign helped to show me the failures of democratic socialism and the need for a revolutionary Marxist-Leninist outlook, because if you try to work within the Democratic Party, the establishment's going to crush you.
Jay, what about you? I know you do a lot of promoting of the party. You're doing a lot of interviews and things like that. And what is it that brought you to the the awareness that you have, and then to your interest in joining the American Communist Party?
Yeah, my story is similar to Eddie's in terms of political background. Growing up, my parents were conservative Republicans. I started seeing cracks or hypocrisies, I guess, in terms of, if you want to use religious language, the widening and loosening of the things that they decided to tackle that seemed to be just like very much mirroring whatever was popular politically at the time. And I came to find out that this was because of C Street and the Family, which there's a book about that you can check out. It's a Pulitzer Prize winning book about how right-wing reactionaries took over the evangelical movement and made it into a political force. I started noticing this when folks would go to eat at Chick-fil-A, right, with other people that they said were going to hell because they believed slightly different things than them, right? But so it was like, well, you're not going to go help feed homeless people, but you'll go eat corporation chicken because I guess gay people are supposedly going to a worse hell or something. I don't know exactly what the logic was behind this, but it definitely made me like take a pause. And I talked to my preacher, who is a great guy at the time, the preacher at the time. And he really, to his credit, he like told me, you need to look into philosophy and politics because of this. And I had been reading James 5 and all of these verses that show preferential treatment for the poor, and really kind of embrace liberation theology at that point. And so I started going to the Republican and the Democrat clubs. I mean, I will say this, I didn't have like a full political understanding by any means, but that was where my head was at. Rob Bell, Peter Rollins, these kinds of folks. And the Republican club that I went to at my school was like a pep rally. And it was, all the kids who were, the Democrat club was more like a strategy meeting. There was more participation. And I guess I became a Democrat for a while there, but then Obama kind of disappointed me with all the drone strikes and things like that. So over time, I started getting involved in. I was in the military, and I became a conscientious objector when I found out we were building oil pipelines instead of building water pipelines, and started going to anti-war protests. And eventually, after about 15 years of organizing and then being involved in campaigns and whatnot, I started seeing the limits of what we could do in this spontaneous sort of way, and started taking Marxism-Leninism seriously. That's, long story short, that's my journey here. And it was through my work for Marx that I came to that understanding.
So, so you were in the military and became a conscientious objector because you saw that there was no, water pipes. It was mostly oil pipes that they were, building and protecting. No, that's so true. That's too true. Ian, I hate to put you on the spot, but why don't you share us a little bit about, your political journey and how you ended up in Moscow?
Well, so I was in the military too, and I left the military in 2021, so 5 years ago. And I just got really interested in Russian culture, Russian literature, and so it wasn't originally any kind of political motive to it. And I actually visited Russia for the first time in winter 2021, December 21. I was there for the New Year. And then, of course, we all know in 2022 is the war with Ukraine and all the sanctions and all of this, basically a new Iron Curtain. And this was the new, and it was so. But no, I was already very disillusioned with everything. I was very disillusioned with everybody in COVID. Like I was just very disappointed by COVID. It was just not even just the liberal, the people who wanted you to wear 6 masks and a balloon, like a portable balloon over you, cone of silence type thing over you, and, just totally, take 12 vaccinations a month, because you just take one. As it wasn't even just them. I was just pointing as conservatives. I was just pointing with kind of just how everybody reacted during COVID. I was very disappointed. I think is a good word for it. And then, in the following year is very disappointing to me. And actually, even before that, I remember it was in April 2021. So it was just within that first 60 days of Biden taking office, and he made this big rabble rousing thing about Russia's the new threat, and we weren't even out at that point. We weren't even out of Afghanistan yet. And I just remember it's like, oh, really? So this is like Ukraine's gonna be like the next thing. We're not just gonna pull out of Afghanistan and be done with it. We have to find somewhere else to go and be involved with. And so, of course, the following year, it was just, we all remember, especially those first 6 months, how crazy it was. They were so McFaul and all those big, talking heads, made 2003, Bush neocons look reasonable in comparison, and it was almost like the same talking points. It was just Russia instead of, Islam or the Arabs. And like you tell them, as you sound exactly the same as the 2003 neocon. They're like, oh, what are you talking about? They're Nazis. We're the good guys. It's just it's so cringe and embarrassing. And also, I still wanted to go to Russia and visit Russia, but I didn't really want to deal with all that, especially because I just kind of said, it's going to be the enemy. It's going to make it. I just decided rather than just go back and forth on a visitor's visa or a tourist visa, I just decided to relocate. I lived in Iowa at the time. I sold my house and I just gave away everything. And I did come back for the dog, and the dog is with me. We flew through Turkey, and I think things in the USA seem maybe less insane than they were in 2022. I'm less concerned about World War III and nukes and everything than I was then, but at the same time, I'm happy here, so I'm not planning on coming back. So that's my that's my past 5 years in a nutshell. I would say yes.
It wasn't so much a disgust with the United States and where it was headed that caused you to leave. That was maybe part of it, but you also just really appreciated Russian culture too.
Right. And I tell people that, and I saw especially when Biden when we have this thing in America, we have this tradition in America where whenever somebody wins the election, the people who lost are like, well, I'm leaving because it's literally Nazi Germany now. And we do this every 4 years. So Trump won the first time. Actually, no, I remember it because I was a kid. I was born in 1998. So I can remember, the tail end of Clinton and Bush winning the first time. It was like, oh, Bush stole the election. He's literally Hitler, blah, 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 blah. And then we had the same thing with Obama, except with Republicans, and especially since Obama was, I think everybody on this panel will agree with me, he was a very overhyped let's say, that's putting it politely, very overhyped. He's just the hope and change, just the greatest. Actually, he was the greatest president in American history, from what people tell me. That's what I've heard. But people who didn't vote for Obama, he's literally Hitler. He was a diversity hire, blah 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 blah, and then we had to go through Trump, and then we had to go through Biden, and so I tell people, you shouldn't just leave because you're mad, right? Because if you have personal problems or political problems, they're going to follow you, and you're still going to be unhappy wherever you go. So if you want to move, that's fine, but you should go to a place because you actually like that place, you like the people there, not because you're unhappy where you are. So
that's a good segue, Ian, about where we want to go with our program today. So, I mean, you just kind of summarized and described how the American political system is such a fraud, and how it pretends to be a democracy where you have the choice between party A or party B, but really, I mean, they're all the same, and they serve the same interests. And so you're not really given a choice. You're given the illusion of choice. And I think to bring it back to, why the need for the American Communist Party and why it's the best hope for America's future is because, unlike the two viable parties that we have, like that, both are, furthering the interests of the billionaire ownership class, like the American Communist Party really represents the interests of the working class majority. And so I just want to throw it to Eddie or Jay, and I want you guys to just talk about kind of, how you see that and how we feel as a party, you guys can, work to further the interests of the working class majority.
Yeah, I think what's so important about the ACP, and obviously I want to be humble here because I helped found the ACP, so I don't just want to come off bragging like, our shit doesn't stink, because of course every party has their internal problems and works to overcome those. But what's really important about the ACP and what makes us distinct from every other so-called socialist or communist party in America is sovereignty, which is the basis of any socialist movement. You really can't establish economic well-being unless you have sovereignty. And this is why all of the countries that the US wants to destroy right now, Russia, Iran, China, Venezuela, these are countries that have established their own sovereignty and their own independence, control over their own resources. And the US is able to stifle their development with sanctions and things. But that's ultimately what they're fighting for, is sovereignty and independence and control over their own land. And that's what we're fighting here in America. The corporations and the banks that control our entire society, political system, and economy are multinational. They're sort of cosmopolitan. They don't have any sort of patriotic attachment to the country or its people or improving the country. All they care about is the dollar. So in a way, we as American workers are occupied by the same class of people who are occupying Palestine and so many countries in Africa that, the Sahel revolutionaries are fighting against. And we are fighting for our own sovereignty and independence from these multinationals and from these banks. Not to say that American workers are in the same situation as Palestinian workers, but it's the same enemy that we're fighting. And the problem with so many other socialist and communist pseudo-radical parties in America is that they're not sovereign because they're tied at the hip to the Democrats. What is the goal of the DSA? It's to run candidates for office within the two-party system and within the Democratic Party. And time again, once these candidates have gotten in office, whether it be AOC or Bernie or more recently Zoran, they've sold out and they've become a part of the Democratic Party machinery. AOC refused to even leverage her power at all and tell Nancy Pelosi to bring Medicare for all up for a floor vote because she didn't want to damage relations within the Democratic Party. So that was her openly saying the Democratic Party is more important than Medicare for all and these sort of mild social democratic policies that so many people want. CPUSA, same thing, attached at the hip to the Democrats. And then PSL is probably the best other than us, but even them, they're mostly what they do is go to protests and march side by side with Democrats over issues that Democrats care about. So we're the only party that's completely split from the Democrats and taken a sovereign approach. And this has gotten people to call us reactionaries or fascists just because we're not with the Democratic Party, kind of like Ian was saying there. Like, if you don't vote for Obama, you're now a fascist because, I don't know, because hope and change. So that's kind of the smear that we've gotten. But anybody, whether in America or outside of America, who fights for sovereignty and independence and a movement that's independent from the global financial system and the American two-party duopoly, anyone who tries to do that is going to get smeared and attacked. But that's what we have to fight through, and do our part here in America to defeat that multinational banking class that really controls most of the world today.
Yeah, that's interesting. I am not familiar with, the other communist parties. I've never had anybody reach out to me. And so, the circle, the media bubble that I'm in, the American Communist Party is basically the only communist party that I'm really familiar with. And I'm not sure why that is. So, thank you for that explanation about the other parties out there and why they're not quite, up to standard. Yeah, I mean, and those are legitimate criticisms you were leveling. I'm not that familiar with the PSL. I'm glad to hear that they're doing some decent work. And in the future, maybe there can be a uniting, because that's really what we need to do, is to grow and not have all these different factions, but we just need to have a united political force. Jay, can you tell me? I know you're the executive chapter of you're on the executive team of the Tennessee chapter of the American Communist Party. And I was just wondering if you could share some of the things you're doing in the community and, activism and things like that you guys are engaged in.
So, yeah, one of the goals of the American Communist Party, in line with that sovereignty that Eddie was talking about, is to develop sustainability, right? So if we're not getting money from these big donors, how are we going to make, keep ourselves running, right? And we develop chapter enterprises. And the chapter enterprise we have in Tennessee specifically is called Tennessee for Rural Life. And what we do is we are focused on going out, doing canvassing, going to farmers markets. When we go into various places in rural areas and talking about issues that are most important to them, specifically dealing with farmers' debt and rural hospital closures. And we are conducting a series of interviews. We're getting data about the top 5 issues in each local area. And we're forming civics groups in these areas that then meet with us and where we have representatives, where we have reserves or cadre, and meeting with us physically, and then also meeting with us digitally. And then from there, they can meet with other people, these other civics groups in rural areas that may face similar problems, and kind of brainstorm on how to tackle those issues. We also do a number of ventures that help raise money for this, whether that's getting grants or whether that's selling gift wrap or being part of license plate programs. We've also done demonstrations against the privatization of TVA, which is the largest public utility in the United States. And we've been involved in a number of other things, but really social investigation and deployments to these rural areas, and having these conversations and then putting these conversations out to the larger public and raising these voices that have long been abandoned by both parties is our primary work right now.
So I know it's the ideological war is probably the most important battle of the class struggle today. And in the United States, people's minds have just been so detached from the reality of oppositional class interests and class struggle. And they don't like that concept of class and the concept of, you have a wealthy elite class whose interests are different, and they are pursuing their interests. And oftentimes their interests are, the opposite of what the majority interests are. But it's difficult to get, to explain to people this reality, because, our society has just been, shaped to ignore that reality and to keep it out of people's consciousnesses, on purpose. So I think that is one of our primary tasks as Marxist Leninists, as workers that have this understanding. Like we have to proliferate this knowledge and share this understanding with people, because if they're detached from reality, like they're not going to be able to effectively work to change that reality. And so to me, I mean, that's why I appreciate the organizing that you guys are doing, the party, and of course, we want to grow. We want to be able to, cause positive political change. But in order to do that, we have to first make sure that people aren't completely detached from reality. And that's a struggle, because what we're up against is incredible. I mean, this propaganda apparatus, this social media being controlled by the billionaires, censorship, platforming of moronic, senseless views that just get shoved down everybody's throats. It's not easy for us individuals to overcome. I wanted to mention that I was motivated. I know Haas has been putting out some outreach videos, trying to encourage people to join the party. And I did, in fact, decide that I wanted to join the party a couple of days ago.
Let's go.
And so I'm here in the West Coast. And there was two major things that made me want to join the party. I mean, number one, I want to engage in real life with other people who share my political understanding, my political beliefs. And I mean, it's stupid to say my political beliefs. I mean, it's just the reality. I mean, that's all it is. It's not political beliefs. It's reality. Like to share people that have a rational understanding of what's going on. And then also, to meet with them in person, socialize with them, but also to, work with them at spreading this understanding and doing good in the community. So, I mean, those were the things. Now, that's outside of my comfort zone. Like, I am more comfortable sitting in my house, not socializing. To me, that's the path of least resistance. That's what I naturally am inclined to do. But no, I think it's important to break out of our comfort zone and engage in the good work, for lack of a better word, to help try and make a positive influence in the community and in the country in general. So I'm looking forward. So the dues, $15 a month. That's definitely something that I can swing. I think that was the minimum. And then, yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, again, I just joined. I guess there's a procedure where there's some learning, and then there's some like educational material that you're kind of required to engage in. And then there's actually a test. So it's still probably easier to join the American Communist Party than the Chinese Communist Party. But there are some, they expect that, you kind of, demonstrate some kind of knowledge. And so I'm looking forward to that experience. But, so I encourage, what else are we going to do with our time? What is more important to do with our time than to, see if we can't help out in the community and to further a rational understanding of just what the hell is going on. And I mean, that's a big topic. Like, what is going on? Like, even where to begin? Like, there is just so much as far as what is going on, and the false understandings and the false narratives that people just embrace. Like, you see it constantly on social media. It's daunting. But I have to engage. I have to be a part of this process, because I'm gonna go insane if I don't participate and do what I can. Anyway, so now I'm gonna put Ian in the spotlight and tell him he needs to join too. He's gonna join the Moscow chapter. He's gonna start the Moscow chapter.
Well, I am actually. If you do send anybody to Moscow for whatever outreach functions, I'm more than happy to help out here. So
awesome. Do you know Nicholas Reed at all? We do have he's sort of like an abroad member who's in Russia.
I have not. No.
Okay.
No, I'm more than happy to meet him. And because I travel around between Moscow and Crimea, and I have a camera kit. And as you already know,
He's got a
fly
new
the
summer home in
videos.
Crimea too, so we're planning on barbecuing there at some point.
Right. Well, because Zelensky did the whole, we're gonna barbecue in Crimea by summer 2023. You guys can beat him there. Have your own barbecue in Crimea.
I love it.
So, do you guys want to talk about? I don't know. I mean, current events.
Actually, yes, I would be very interested in hearing. Well, maybe first off, just for the uninitiated, I don't think there are actually very many of those people who don't already know who the ACP is. At least on Billy Bob's show, I think most are either existing ACP members or people who, at the very least, know what it is. But maybe for those who are unfamiliar, maybe give us a quick rundown of. Actually, the main thing I'd like to hear about is the culture war. Now, Eddie, you did touch on that subject a little bit, but I would like to hear your take on when it comes to the whole, like Hinkle's outreach towards, MAGA type people, and how Democrats have really embraced, the social, woke Marxism, progressive, or whatever Tucker Carlson likes to call it. I forget what he calls it. He calls it like cultural Marxism, the cultural Marxism of the Democratic Party. I'd like to hear maybe your take, maybe your personal take out, or even if the ACP has, an official stance on it. I'd be interested to hear that.
Yeah, I'll speak for myself. The ACP stance is tolerance, basically broadly, meaning tolerance not only of people who are more liberal in their cultural values, but also tolerance of people who are more conservative in their cultural values. Like any other so-called socialist or communist organization in America would kick you out for, I don't know, being like pro-life or something, pro-life, which is the term that's been used to hyper politicize the idea or the issue of abortion and keep people fighting each other and against their own class interests, which is how that issue is used in America. But we have tolerance for people's social issues so long as you're willing to fight on the core issues for the betterment of the American working class as a class and for the end of imperialism, which is a negative thing for all workers internationally. So that's kind of the party's position, but I have a lot of takes on this. I think Gabriel Rockhill's work, he's not a fan of the ACP, but he has done a lot of important work on tracing out the economic incentives behind a lot of the pseudo-Marxist thinkers of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And what a lot of these so-called Marxist academics did while being funded by the Ford Foundation and deeply connected to the CIA in a lot of cases, is they basically tried to replace class with culture. So rather than fighting for higher wages or more free time or more control in the workplace, we're going to make all of our politics about sex and gender and all these hyper divisive cultural issues. No longer is it class struggle, but it's cultural struggle. And this kind of took off only in the West. Marxism, Leninism in the global South and in the East, in a lot of places, has always kind of continued to be Marxism, Leninism in the traditional sense, the ACP style outlook on Marxism, Leninism. But in the West, it sort of became this like liberal thing. Like Marxism is when you go out and march for trans rights and physically attack anybody who disagrees with you on trans rights. Like that kind of became the outlook of these pseudo radicals, and it was a lot of academics and petty bourgeois class elements rather than proletarian class elements. And actually, a lot of these liberal culture war battles were very off-putting to proletarian elements, very off-putting to working class people who don't want to talk about sex and gender politics. They want to talk about their workplace. So what the right wing did, though, which is kind of ingenious, and this was the Steve Bannon strategy that helped get Trump elected in the first place, was they embraced the narrative that that is Marxism. Cultural Marxism, woke Marxism, pseudo-Marxism is real Marxism, and the Democrats are Marxists and communists. So you have these sort of fake leftists, fake Marxists, pushing this idea that it's all about culture war rather than class. And then you have the Republicans on the other side saying, yeah, they're right. So that's why you have to vote for us. And that's why communism is evil. And in reality, real communism, which has been hidden and buried and kept away from the American people, is the solution to their problems. It's what they need. But they're taught that Marxism is everything that they hate. And then you have people calling themselves Marxists who represent that, who are like, yes, we're going to, come in and, I don't know, force your kid to be trans or whatever that the conservative proletarians think Marxism is. So it's sort of a false dialectic then, where the people's understanding of Marxism is this fake Marxism, and that's reinforced both by the fake left and the right. And what we're trying to do with our position on tolerance is split the middle and say all of this culture war stuff is bullshit for the most part. You need to organize along class lines.
I'm of the opinion that, I mean, like you said, the conservatives see, woke Marxism and decide, oh, that is what leftism is. But at the same time, it's like touching an elephant by the tail while another person touches it by the trunk. There is truth to both, even if they're just not seeing the full picture. I do think the CIA and the State Department saw, these leftist movements in the 20th century and took some of those ideas for their own toolbox, right? Because you can learn from your enemy. You can even completely adopt his tactics and ideas, but for yourself. It doesn't mean you agree with them. You just say, hey, that's a good idea. I'm going to do that. And it's actually very effective to push weaponized woke ideology, especially overseas, because it appeals to younger people, to college age and even kids, teenagers. You make them feel like, you're part of the resistance. They're part of this force for good because your culture is sexist and it's bigoted and it's backwards and xenophobic, blah, blah, blah. And you're really, by making it, I don't think it's actually stupid to make everything about gender. It's very effective because human society is a sexually dimorphic species. So every culture, to some extent or the other, has some sort of gender norms and wants people to conform to those ideas to some extent. Regardless of whether there's a very liberal culture or a very conservative culture, everybody has that. So you're really attacking them at the very foundation of their society by doing that, by making it all about, you have this Iranian resistance or this alleged Syrian resistance or Russian resistance, Chinese resistance, whatever it is. And it's like, why are they so obsessed, with trans issues? Oh, well, our country doesn't have enough transgender clinics or whatever. Well, it's because it works. That's why they do it. You just want to cause chaos and disrupt that country. It's a great way to do it. So that's my 2 cents.
Can I say something real quick too? There's a really good book, not a really good book, a really telling book by Samantha Power called The Problem of Genocide or something like that. And that was written in the early 2000s, and she would go on to help to direct Obama's foreign policy and be the USAID director for Biden, which is one of the main organizations that did exactly what you're talking about, fomenting color revolutions. By pushing sex and gender politics and getting young and petty bourgeois people on board with these color revolution efforts. But in that book, she basically lays out that that's the strategy, is to attack other countries at their foundations by accusing them of being bigoted and xenophobic. And now under Trump, I just think we're seeing that mask sort of fall off the U.S. empire, where he's like, nope, it's about the oil, but we're going to go in and take it and kill your people anyways if you try to stop it. Whereas Obama was a much more intelligent manager of empire who knew how to commit the most heinous, murderous acts like destroying Libya and bringing slavery back in the name of democracy and trans and gay rights, or things like that. So I agree, it's been a very successful strategy, and I think part of that stems from the Trotskyite to neocon pipeline. Like a lot of the early members of the CIA were former Trotskyites. And that goes to what you said. They had an understanding of Marxism. They had an understanding of the system and how it works. They just chose to fight for evil. They chose to fight on the side of the ruling class. So I think that's when they developed some really nefarious and almost ingenious in an evil way tactics for, not only fomenting color revolutions abroad, but keeping people divided here at home, because they really use the same tactics.
And I'd like to say, I think, given that 90% of legislation is controlled by 1% of the population through corporate lobbyism, these disagreements we may have on cultural issues are moot, right? We have no agency on these things. The only leverage we have is that we build everything as working people. And when we go into conversations with folks, my strategy is to try and figure out what side they're on, criticize the other side, right? And then when they've seen that we're on the same page in terms of criticism, then I say, well, I'm glad that your party is 100% pro-worker and it's 100% in your interest and you have no disagreements. And then they'll correct the record, right? And then I'll say that previous statement about corporate lobbyism. And now the conversation from then on is about power, and it's about like working class power, and disassociated and detached from the discourse. So I think it's people are yearning for unity, and we have the capacity to bring it to them, because as I know from being involved with other organizations that we've mentioned before, they don't, at least the ones I've been involved in, they ideologically align you, but they don't require any sort of education that's ongoing. They don't require you to read theory. We're not just reading it, we're applying it. And everyone else seems to be holding signs.
That's a great approach to dealing with, people who are caught up in either the Democrat or the Republican, partisanship. I usually get really angry at the very beginning and just start calling people stupid. And I don't think that's as effective as your approach. It sounds like a smart, tactful way to go about it. I'm hoping to learn and get better, but I get so, disgusted and bewildered at the level of the anti-intellectualism and the just, total detachment from reality that you experience with regular people on social media. And my patience is just, so I need to work on that and be tactful and, but it is challenging. So, we have a global situation where the United States is feeling very threatened from, rising Russia, rising China. And Trump is a symptom of this, and Trump is being put in place to do a lot of things that Obama couldn't do, right? Because Obama was constrained by certain liberal norms, and Trump doesn't have these constraints. So he is all about expediency and just doing what needs to be done to salvage empire, maintain Western hegemony, et cetera, et cetera. But it's super interesting times. And, this is the best time to have a party that actually represents the people to be able to engage with and work with. And so, I mean, there hasn't been a better time in the last 50 years than now to try and really organize and get the American people's attention and to turn them on into what is really going on.
I want to bring up, just for an example, I want to bring up Syria, right? Because European Democrats or, European Federalists, American Democrats, that was their pet project for, I guess, more than a decade. And it was very much like a football game to them. They were picking like their favorite teams. I think that some of the topics we've hit upon in this show all applied to Syria. Like they would have a photo of these Islamic guys with a pride flag, like, oh, these are the queer commies resisting the regime. Like literally, those were the literal headlines. These queer communists, and it's just like of course their only evidence for these alleged movements even exist is because someone took a photo, in a field with a pride flag. I mean, I could go take a picture of myself with a pride flag in the field, say, look, there's this huge guerrilla movement in Russia because there's a guy in a mask holding a pride. It's so, and you tell them that, they're like, no, it's real. And they were really big on the Kurdish, like these Kurdish terrorists who Turkey is rightfully
Hillary Clinton's favorite revolutionaries, the Kurds.
Right. Yes. and so they really, and they're terrorists, but they branded themselves as and they're not centrally organized either. They're not. They just market themselves as centrally organized under the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Force, or whatever that stands for. And this is like every person from Western Europe, like it seemed like almost every person from Western Europe, or the coastal USA I would talk to would be like, oh, the SDF this, the SDF that. I don't support ISIS. I support the SDF. It's like, well, and I tell them, well, if the central regime collapses, if the central government collapses, then ISIS wins. You don't get to. It's not a fantasy football league where you can pick and choose like your own team. I want Batman and Superman. They're so Marvel slop coded. It's painful. But they're like, no, it wouldn't. That wouldn't happen. And then Assad did collapse, and it happened very suddenly. It took us. It was one of those things where it was very sudden. I was surprised that it did come out of the blue. But it's Arab. Unfortunately, Arab states, Gulf states are all. I think almost all of them are very fragile, and it's just. I think there is a tendency for American leftists to be so too emotionally attached to these, because you just, especially if it's a country you're not very familiar with, you're just like, oh, I support these people. You're kind of committing the same crime as Democrats who say I support the IDF. You can't, you shouldn't throw all of your weight behind people, groups and ideas you don't really know that much about. But also, they tend to be fragile. I'm sorry. So if you get so emotionally committed, you're just going to be you're going to spend a lot of your life disappointed. If you, because the governments in that region come and go. I'm sorry, they do. But anyway, so it did collapse very suddenly, and everything that we were saying would happen if in that scenario happened. The country fell apart. Israel was the main winner. They systematically destroyed millions and millions of dollars of accumulated air defense networks, and which was a huge regional victory, it was a huge strategic victory for Israel. Even if because it sounds like they're not thrilled with the new regime, but regardless of whether things work out between Israel and the new government, it's still a huge success for them, because Syria is a lot worse off than it was. Even if you just say Assad was a dick, he was just a terrible person, terrible, corrupt, bad government. You can say all that stuff you can say is true, but it's better than getting curb stomped by a foreign power and losing basically your entire military, which is what happened. And the funny part, what I find funny, is the Kurds are getting stomped too, because the HTS is backed by Turks, and they're stomping the hell out of the Kurds. These precious queer, gay, LGBT freedom fighter people are getting stomped, and just total silence. It's amazing. Like I don't understand these people. What's going on between their ears, because they're so just radio silence, nothing. I even directly asked him, well, what you were like these people who I remember arguing, so you were blabbing to me, oh great, yes, what about that? Oh, they just evade it. It's
the whole purpose of the U.S. intervention was to defeat ISIS, right? We were ostensibly fighting against ISIS and Al-Qaeda when in reality, of course, we were on their side, wanting them to, destroy the Assad government, which they did. And it was, I was surprised. I was shocked. It was a real bad for the Middle East. It was bad for humanity, especially the Syrians. And I know, the Gulf states. So we were talking about USAID. We're talking about information war and propaganda, and places like Al Jazeera. If you've ever watched Al Jazeera, they get the street cred from being pretty good on Palestine. But then they're worse than CNN on every other issue. And they've been indoctrinating these wealthy little Gulf monarchies and all the people that, comprise those countries into Westernism and into the same thing. And so they're anti-China, they're anti-Russia. And so the information war is a huge problem, but it's the primary battlefield that the U.S. is, waging war. But we see more and more that Trump is now going to be doing actual other kinds of fighting too. like with Iran, we don't know, it could be just a matter of hours or days, and there could be more bombing of Iran and a real regime change effort. But that's really the big thing that's going on right now. It's the information war, the narrative war. Is Iran, a terrible regime that we should overthrow, or is Iran a terrible regime that we should not overthrow? That is the Overton window, which people in the West are forced to deal with. You can't say Iran is a regime, is a government that deserves our support, that represents the Iranian people against Western imperialism. Like, that's the correct take. And that's not, that is dismissed, that is censored. And instead, all that you're allowed to do is, hey, they're an evil regime. Should we overthrow them? Yes. Or we should not overthrow them. And then that is the discussion that takes place on all the platforms, that are owned by the billionaires. So we have to, do what we can to, widen the Overton window and inject some common sense into that discussion. But it is a daunting task. But yeah, no, I'm seeing all day long on X. I'm seeing, what's the recent number? It's like 12,000. The regime has murdered 12,000 innocent protesters, and they're just putting these narratives out that are detached from reality, but they contribute to, and they're encouraging Trump to do something such as bomb that country, and that's what you see is taking place. So. But let me say this. One thing I like about the ACP is, again, like, they have the focus where the focus ought to be. And it's like, I mean, what we do on this program for the past 181 shows, talking, having the right position with regards to U.S. imperialism, it's the same thing. And so it's just a no-brainer for me to belatedly, join the party. And so I'm happy to do it, and it did take quite a while, but it's also divisive, right? It's a little bit divisive, I know, and I'm sorry to hear that Gabriel Rockhill is not a big supporter. Like, his work is really tremendous. I know. I like Rockhill. I think he's part of the other party, right? The
PSL, yeah. He's tied in with those networks.
Okay. But I mean, again, we don't discriminate, and we don't, we don't dismiss people because of their views. So we appreciate his work, but so.
Can I say something about the Syria comics? I thought that was really good and interesting. I like the term Marvel brain. Because I think what Billy Bob's talking about with winning the ideological war is, yes, probably the most important thing right now in America until we have an actual civil war, and fighting in the streets. The ideological war is the most important thing. And I actually have a theory that the entertainment media brainwashes people more than even the news media. Because not that many people watch news media anymore, cable news, but they do watch Marvel movies and such. And it gets them to think in a very, what Marx and Engels would call a metaphysical and idealist way rather than a dialectical and materialist way. And that's why the education program created by my colleague Carlos Garrido for the ACP is so important. Because as a Marxist, I see this sort of Marvel brain thinking as a lack of dialectical thinking. You have people who are like, well, the U.S. empire is bad, yes, but also Iran is bad. They're looking for some perfect, pure superhero that they can actually support, and Iran's not it. And it's like, well, look who's fighting imperialism in practice, right? Sure, you would rather have Iran be a communist government than an Islamic government, but you can't just build the Iranian government however you want. It's an Islamic government that has sovereignty, controls their own banks and industry, and the Western imperialists want to destroy them because they're fighting imperialism in practice. You see the same thing with Russia. Well, Russia's not communist, so I support Ukraine. And it's like, okay, well, you can't just pick whatever country. You can't just make Russia's government whatever you want it to be. You have to look at who's actually fighting imperialism in practice. And a lot of these same people will then support the Sahel revolutionaries in Burkina Faso and Mali and Niger, but then they don't support Russia. It's like, well, who do you think gave them the guns, guys? Who do you think is supporting those Sahel revolutionaries? It's the Russians, and it was the Russians who saved Syria the first time as well. So that is objectively, concretely fighting imperialism in practice, even if you have criticisms of things that their government do or does. And then, of course, you have people on the other side who don't know anything about these countries, and they're just like, Assad is perfect or whatever. And we need to have middle ground. Yes, you support Assad because he's a sovereign Ba'athist socialist government supporting the Palestinian resistance and fighting imperialism. But we can also have a sober analysis of what was wrong with that government. You know, the fact that he didn't go into Idlib and get rid of these terrorists when he had the chance, and he allowed them to regroup with the help of Israel and the U.S. and eventually take over his country. He didn't do land redistribution to help get the proletariat or the peasants or proletarians on his side more. And he allowed some corrupt generals to remain in the army rather than doing like a Stalinist purge. So you can make criticisms while still supporting them. This is the dialectical way to look at things. But people are in America are so indoctrinated with this metaphysical, you know, methodology or lens of thought, way of approaching the world, where it's superheroes and bad guys. And, you know, that's not how reality works. In a way, it does. There are good guys and bad guys, but, you know, the good guys aren't perfect. You know, and we need to be self-critical at the same time that we support them.
Well, and like, you know, I think in my opinion, the people who are pro-Palestine and pro-Ukraine are the stupidest people on the planet. Like I hate them even more than the pro-Russia, pro-Israel people. At least you're like, okay, I can sort of at least understand sort of the logical basis for being pro-Israel and pro-Russia. I can sort of get it, but if you're pro-Palestine and pro Ukraine, you're just an idiot, because again, it's being Marvel brained, because Ukraine and Israel are allies. They are literally allies. Both of them have repeatedly and endlessly said that. Ukrainians, if you look at Ukrainian sources, they are unequivocally, overwhelmingly are pro-Israel and think, they literally are like, they love what they're doing to Gaza. We wish we could do it to do that to Donbass. I mean, it's so they so overtly say these things, but these guys are just like, well, I want my team to have the Incredible Hulk and Superman. And, it's how they think. It's like, you can't just pick, like you were saying, you can't just pick a team, be like, oh, well, I'm against Russia. Even like you said, Russia is support, and Iran. Those are the two, I'd say the two big regional and world powers helping, at least indirectly helping, Palestinians, because Israel can't just roll all over them while they're threatened. And when something like the collapse of Syria happens, Israel overwhelmingly benefits and Palestinians overwhelmingly lose from that. When Israel did that sneak attack with the exploding pagers and cell phones and crippled Hezbollah, which again took a lot of people, because Hezbollah was militarily, they had a pretty good track record against the IDF. So it was a well-executed attack by Israel, and that surprised a lot of people. But again, these liberals are like, oh, well, they're terrorists, they deserve it. Well, so you just will say, why do you even pretend to care about Palestinians when when you consume and repeat every CIA talking point and are against every single country that is even tangentially helping Palestinians? It's amazing, actually.
Jay, did you have any thoughts? I know I agree with Ian that liberalism is not conducive to consistency or lack of hypocrisy. I mean, those liberalism, inconsistency, and hypocrisy, like all those go hand in hand. I mean, that's a given. Any thoughts, Jay?
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that we have to get people involved with material reality, with the real, right? And I think that a lot of this falls into idealism, right? Wherein people are looking at what they want to believe, they're coming up with the ideas in their head of what would be the best case scenario, whatever. They're not really looking at the conditions that actually exist before and after the situation. They're looking at things very spontaneously. And the flip side of that idealism is nihilism. When you realize that all of your thoughts don't affect reality in the way that you thought they did, you can easily, then just give up. Well, then it doesn't matter. And I think that there's a lot of different things that can push that kind of that nihilism. We really have to be there with the people when they come up to these limits so that they can see that there is another way, that the way they were going isn't the be all and end all, and that we can, be a canopy not only for the collapse of the infrastructure, but a canopy for the collapse of the individuals as they fall into potentially nihilism otherwise, and then the easy ground for the fascists.
That's a great point, and I am always accusing people with those labels of being idealistic or nihilistic, and I reject both. Right? I mean, we have to. Like, if we're serious about improving reality, we can't get caught up in useless idealism, and then nihilism is giving up. I mean, I'm not ready to give up. Like, it looks daunting what we're up against, but I mean, what are you going to do with your life if you're not engaged in that struggle? Like, you're just wasting your time. Guys, Eddie, man, I am just so surprised that you popped in, and I'm very appreciative. I know we've taken your time for a whole hour. I did not know you were going to be joining us, and it's been a real fantastic treat. Thank you so much. I don't want to kick you out, but I know we've been going for an hour, and I don't want to keep you if you have some important business to take care of. I'm happy to talk for another hour. I could hear myself talk for another hour, but nobody would want that. Anything anybody wants to say that is relevant to what we've talked about so far?
I appreciate you guys for having us on, and I think your point that you made a couple times, like, what else are you going to do with your life except join the party and fight? I agree with completely. Like, that I would rather be just coaching wrestling and focusing on the things that I enjoy in life and growing my, private wrestling club that I run. But it's like, how can you look at the world around you and the state of our society and the, humanity as a whole, and not feel compelled to do something, not feel compelled to use your energy and your time to fight back. So I know people, are maybe feeling nihilistic and or maybe they're worried about joining the party because they might get smeared, or there could be consequences from that. It's always a little bit of a risk to publicly be a communist in America, but it's like, man, people, they're slaughtering babies with your tax money while drowning you in debt, and leading the country down a path towards civil war and total imperial decay. Like, how are you just going to sit around and try to ignore that and block that out? Like, we need to fight, and that's what men are supposed to do, and women. But we're supposed to protect our society, our youth, and actually care about the collective. And if the collective is decaying, it's our job to stand up and fix it. So I see it as, almost in a spiritual sense, like a duty that we have to our people and to our country. And I would encourage anybody who's on the fence to take the leap and join the party and see what it's all about, because I think you will find a lot of purpose and motivation in that, on a personal level as well.
Thank you so much for having us. Yeah, I would definitely mirror what Eddie was saying about duty. It's like, if you have the time and the capacity, and you have the knowledge of what needs to be done, join up and with others, and you can exponentiate your efforts. If you feel like whatever organization you're working with isn't doing the kind of work you think they should be doing, this is a party that you can really come in and help do something that's meaningful. I think the last thing I'd say would be that I want to thank everybody who so far has. I've been doing a project where I've been interviewing members of the American Communist Party, and just hearing their stories from all over the country. And it's such an inspiration to know that there's so many brilliant, dedicated folks doing real work to build something that can scale up in so many different ways and synergize in so many different ways. And I look forward to putting that out. Eddie was one of the folks that's on there. It's going to be coming out here very soon. So look out for that.
Yeah, I want to thank you guys and your work. I mean, especially Eddie, like, you have such a big reach on different social media platforms, and it's really been amazing work. And I mean, we can all aspire to having that kind of a reach. And so you've achieved it, and you just deserve credit. And it's not easy, because we're up against these algorithms and the billionaire owners of these things. So, but thank you guys both so much. We will reconvene on Friday. We have another program, episode 182 on Friday. And I concur. I encourage everyone to join the party. There's no reason not to. If you can't afford the $15, they'll probably even make an exception. They'll probably work with you. I don't think that's a do or die issue. But on that note, we will reconvene next week, or actually Friday. Thank you very much. We will see you then. Bye.